months ago, the New York Times analyzed data by healthcare analyst Charles Gaba and found that in counties where Donald Trump received at least 70% of the vote, the virus has killed about 47 out of every 100,000 people since the end of June. I did a radar in this analysis. Take a quick look. What we do know right now is that the vaccine is highly effective at preventing death from COVID, and people who don't get vaccinated are more likely to die. And right now, people in Trump counties are less likely to be vaccinated and more likely to die. It doesn't have to be this way. A new NPR report expands on this trend. It found counties that went heavily for Donald Trump have seen much lower vaccination rates and much higher death rates from COVID. And they claim that misinformation is to blame. According to data from the Kaiser Family Foundation, 94% of Republicans think one or more false statements about COVID-19 and vaccines might be true, compared to 14% of Democrats who believe 4 or more false statements about the disease. The most widely believed false statement around COVID-19 was, quote, "The government is exaggerating the number of COVID-19 deaths." Here to discuss further is Newsweek deputy opinion editor and author Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya, welcome.
Thank you.
So I thought the most interesting and maybe least controversial line in that NPR study was, came from one of the authors who said, look, if I were trying to figure out if somebody is vaccinated, and I could only ask one question, the question I would ask is, what party are you in? And I don't think anybody would disagree with that on either side of the spectrum. But the result, the significantly higher death rate seems to be something that you can't ignore. But how are people responding to this in Trump country?
It's so funny. I was all prepared to come in here and say, this is what happens when, the elites compromise themselves by being horrible and by looking down and sneering at the working class and blah, blah, blah. But when you look at those numbers, they are just devastating. I mean, exactly like you said, that you can actually tell me whether somebody's percentage likelihood to die from COVID is 3 times higher based on which party they voted for. That is just a devastating number. There's no two ways about it. Anybody who has any influence over Republican voters who is not using that influence to push them to get vaccinated and save their lives, I just have no words for that, the abdication of moral responsibility that's happening. Now, I do want to say, I saw yesterday Glenn Youngkin had tweeted something along the lines of, I just got my booster. This is everybody's choice, but please make the right choice. And I think that kind of messaging is perfect, because I do think the vaccine mandates are an overreach. They do signal to people that you're taking away their choice, you're taking away their liberty, in addition to creating an underclass of people who can't work. But at the same time, I just feel like the responsibility here is on the people who have influence with these voters, have influence, can speak to them at their level and convince them to get this life-saving vaccine.
Well, especially if they're not going to do it because for reasons of compassion, for reasons of not wanting people to suffer and to die, at some point the Republican Party has to grapple with the fact that it's losing a lot of its older vote, a reliable group of people who vote Republican in higher numbers. It's losing more of them. And this COVID did not have a political death skew at the beginning. It was not tracking with how you would vote or anything like that. It was only after the introduction of it was along the way toward vaccines, and initially you didn't even have that be a partisan. Donald Trump was all for vaccines, talked about how he took credit for inventing them. It was only in the last few months where this has become a partisan issue and like a losing one for the side that's not going to get vaccinated because they are more likely to die.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder if it even makes sense to talk about this in the context of deaths of despair, right? It's a protest against an elite that is benefiting and working, right? And in a way, it's almost like another way of saying, I'm literally willing to die on the crucible of sticking it to the elites. And all I can do, I have no other way of doing that except by sacrificing my own life. So, of course, we do have some responsibility on our side for that kind of divide that makes that so attractive to people. And I completely agree with you, Robbie. It's like a weird form of voter suppression almost of Republicans, right? So, not convincing them that the first thing you have to do is, stay alive so that you can improve this country.
Keep your coalition. Winning coalitions have their voters be alive. Losing coalitions don't have living voters.
Well, maybe they're really buying the propaganda that hundreds of thousands of dead people voted for Democrats, and so they're like, well, we don't actually need our voters to be alive. We can just fraudulently have them cast their ballots anyway. So, Batya, what is it going to take to turn this around? Because like you said, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about these mandates. But very quickly, the loudest voices who are expressing that skepticism very quickly drift into straight up anti-vaccine propaganda. Probably just scroll down into the comments of this, and you can hear it descend into that very quickly.
The comments of anything, of literally anything.
It's not here. It's absolutely everywhere. And it devolves into that place where people instead of arguing against mandates, they're arguing against getting the vaccine at all, saying it doesn't slow transmissibility, which is just completely untrue. And then you might have some people say, well, okay, yes, it does prevent, it does make it less likely if you're older to die from it.
I mean, the most dangerous one right now is the well, look at all the people who are dying who got vaccinated. Whatever percentage of deaths are among the vaccinated, which is actually proving that the vaccines are working. If we had 100% of everyone on Earth was vaccinated, you would have 100% of the deaths among the vaccinated. That wouldn't mean that you would have more deaths if you had everyone unvaccinated. Is the reality of that.
Right, and Batya, you often hear, well, we don't know what the long-term implications of the vaccine are. Of course we don't. We definitely don't, and there's reasons to be, skeptical and nervous about it. We also don't know the long-term implications of COVID, yet somehow that doesn't get factored in. Have you seen this move at all? Because at the beginning of the kind of vaccine politics, you did have high resistance among black voters in the U.S., but. And understandably so, given the relationship with the medical community over the years. But as billions of people got vaccinated and people saw, okay, actually, this is safer than not getting vaccinated, you've seen that resistance, significantly diminish. Are you seeing that at all, or are people just dug in here?
I think the data does show, the most recent data does show that there has been a decrease in cases. And so a decrease in that gap of deaths will follow that decrease in gap of cases. So I think that we are seeing a little bit of movement on this front. I am hearing from people, that they, as you see people in your community going through another wave, there's always a wave of vaccinations that follows on that. And of course, the numbers among seniors, the gap between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated between Republicans and Democrats is much smaller than in the general population. So I'm hoping we will see some sort of, that gap start to close as time goes on.
But you can find, I see that there's an account on Twitter that does this. It looks for, then and now tweets from Democratic officials, from media figures, being like, back then, well, I don't know if I'll get the Trump vaccine. I might wait. I'm very cautious. And then that was then, and then today is, how could anyone doubt this vaccine? Why are you deluded by anti-science propaganda? And it's like, just look what you had to say, and it's totally partisan.
Yeah, and there has been misinformation coming out of the quote-unquote science community. They are suppressing information about breakthroughs, about the side effects of the vaccine. They are, inflating the numbers of COVID deaths. If somebody dies of a heart attack and they happen to also have COVID, that will count as a COVID death, right? So there are reasons to be skeptical. Skepticism is good, right? We're on the side of science, so we should be on the side of skepticism. But again, I think the overarching message here is the responsibility is really on the people the unvaccinated unvaccinated listened to. Just like we saw in the Black community, there was a huge push to convince people, and a push that was very successful across the board. Yeah. I just will say one more thing, which is that the number one predictor for being unvaccinated is still being low income. I think there are a lot of people who just can't afford to take the time off, don't have the child care. And if we really focused on that, I think a lot of these gaps would close as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's dissension within the media. It's not always the New York Times has been kind of very anti-boosters in their reporting. There's been a lot of criticism, or a lot of selective quoting of scientific officials saying, "Oh, the boosters aren't really necessary." So it's when you say believe the science, well, what does that mean? The science is a process of arriving at truth. People can disagree, but we got to go. Batya, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.